Disclaimer. I do not own any of the Haikyuu characters, artwork or music I may use. This is also not how I see the Haikyuu characters, and this is just for entertainment purposes only. I also apologize in advance for any grammar errors or misspelt words that may come up in this video, as English is not my first language. Thank you, and enjoy the video. Dull gray clouds disrupted the clear weather they were supposed to be having. Perhaps those faulty weather forecasts really shouldn't be trusted. Raindrops fell from the sky and down the streets of Hyogo, landing on concrete pavements, plastic umbrellas, and roofs of buildings. Kita's white hair is disheveled by the time he enters the city library. He pulled his hood down after pushing through the doors, grateful for not being soaked from the downpour, but he was not completely spared. It was his sleeves and back that had suffered the most. His school blazer was drenched in rainwater, and he knew he was going to get an earful at home because his grandmother was right and he should have brought an umbrella. It's not Kita's fault, and in his defense, nobody expected that it would rain. The city was supposed to be welcoming good weather. They were 3 weeks into spring, after all. Previously, Kita had been at the park, enjoying sitting in his usual spot under a huge oak tree behind a small yet decorative statue of a now deceased but well-known, seemingly in this case, individual. It was then where he was simply relaxing, when rain came pouring from out of nowhere, disturbing his peace. Well, it's no use crying over spilt milk now. Kita's going to camp out in the library for a bit until the rain stops. He needed to borrow a few textbooks for school anyway. He tries drying himself with a small hand towel he has. It's definitely not much, but it helps, and he doesn't feel that cold anymore. Thankfully, the library wasn't too crowded today. He quickly found a seat at a table away from most people. On the table were a few books, but there weren't any other signs that someone else might be sitting there, so Kita sat down. It's not that he loathes human interaction, it's just a little awkward to read when someone else was near him, 'tis all. Kita feels much better when he's certain that nobody is watching him, so he can react as much as he wants to the scenes happening on the pages without anyone supposedly judging him. It's also because last week at school, someone had accidentally bumped into him, spilling their drink all over Kita's book, certainly putting the juice in Pride and Prejudice. Kita said it was fine in the moment but cried his eyes out the moment he got home. That copy had so many annotations already. His thoughts in the form of ink in the book's margins, underlined sentences that he found interesting or funny, and loads of sticky notes that contained more commentary for when the page could not fit what he wanted to say. All of it was gone. Just like that. Kita didn't throw the book away. He just kept it somewhere on his bookshelf, but it was no use. Its soul was soiled and tainted, and its body was left to rot away until it was consumed by dust and reduced to a forgotten binding of yellow paper. So Kita bought another copy. Even though he had a brand new one, Kita still mourned the one he had lost. Kita puts down his bag in the seat next to him and pulls out the book. His old one was a Penguin Popular Classics version, but this one was a 1972 edition. At least the cover was still pretty. Kita guesses that softened the blow by a tiny bit. He grabs his pencil case and a few sticky notes and placed it in front of him. Putting his earphones in and opening Spotify to listen to the soundtrack of the 2005 film adaptation of the novel, Kita disappears from modern reality and into the 19th century town of Longbourn. The Bennett sisters would have loved Taylor Swift, Kita thought. Especially Lizzie. Kita snorts at his own thoughts. He pictures a modern Elizabeth Bennet listening to the chorus of The Way I Loved You on repeat every time after she argues with Mr. Darcy. Would he still even be called Mr. Darcy? There's no way a 21st century person would be named Fitzwilliam. Maybe his nickname could be shortened to William, or even Liam to be even shorter. Kita could picture the cast in modern times calling the main characters Liam and Lizzie, and said main characters would call each other William or Eliza whenever they were pissed off, which was always. He's nearly halfway through the book. He decided he was going to start the whole book entirely again instead of just going to the page where he left off because he knew it was going to bother him. Kita passed the 100th page mark a few minutes ago, completely absorbed in the piece of fiction in his hands. If he wasn't, he would have noticed the several pairs of footsteps behind him. Kita's vision is covered by two hands placed over his eyes. He was obviously startled, jumping in surprise in his seat. He's not usually a jumpy person, but his nose was way too deep inside his book to be aware of his surroundings. Now that he wasn't, he could hear the muffled giggles from behind him. If this is Atsumu, then Osamu is right behind you, and if the twins are here, then Akagi and Suna are too. The giggling stops. There's the sound of shuffling footsteps. Kita decides to remove the hands on his face. He looks up to see Atsumu smiling sheepishly down at him. Kita looks behind him, and the rest of the people he mentioned before were standing there. He gives them a smile and wave. Osamu puts his hands on his hips, coming closer. How do you always see right through everything, Kita-san? It's not that hard to guess, you guys are very predictable. Now that he's acknowledged his friend's presences, he can go back to his book. Unfortunately, he should have known that his friends aren't going to let him do that. The new cafe that opened recently is right around the corner. The twins wanted us to come. Their little group consisted of 2 literature-loving nerds and 3 very quiet introverts. They've been friends since the start of high school, and they're probably each other's only friends in the whole school. While they usually do their own thing, they do hang out together outside of school from time to time. Come on, Atsumu groaned, pulling on Kita's arm. They became friends because they were sent to the principal's office for the color of their hair on the first day of school. Surprisingly, Osamu wasn't included in the bunch. Apparently gray seemed to be a more natural hair color than blonde and white, but they digress. It won't be that bad. You can read your book there, Kita-san. Why do you want me to go that badly? We're friends. That's what friends do. He found out there was a discount on cakes if it was for a group of 5. Horizontal ellipsis. Horizontal ellipsis. Sunarin, I'm kicking you out of this friend group. Kita ended up giving in to their whims. It's not like he could just outright ignore his friends when they were right there. That's a horrible thing to do. He weighed the pros and cons in his mind, and realized one of the pros was that a cafe atmosphere would be a good background noise for reading. Fine. But I need to borrow a book really quick. Atsumu lights up like a star in the night sky. Osamu does too, but he tries to be subtle about it. They all wanted that discount if they were being honest. Akagi basically inhales sweets, and the menu really interested Suna, so everybody wins at the end. Go on then. We'll take care of your stuff. Osamu ushered Kita out of his chair. Just put my things in my bag. As he walks off, he hears an "Aye, Captain" from over the bookshelves and shakes his head. He passes by a librarian. He was pushing a cart full of books that he almost was hit by. He kept apologizing profusely, but Kita reassured him that it was okay. I'm terribly sorry. I should have gotten more sleep. He then grumbled, probably to himself. Kita shook his head. It's fine, really. Oh, and can you tell me where the science workbooks are? The gray-haired boy looks behind him and points. They're right down there. But please be quiet when you walk over, someone's sleeping against one of the nearby bookshelves. Kita nodded. It was not odd for people to nap in these places. The library was a known safe space for everyone. Ah, I see. Thank you for telling me. Ah. Sugawara. My name is Sugawara, but my friends call me Suga. Kita politely bows before him. It was nice to meet you, Sugawara. My name is Kita. Thanks again for the help. It was no problem. And with that, he was off. He followed the librarian's directions and got to the section he was looking for. He skimmed through the various books, dragging his finger across the spines. Kita hoped the book he was looking for wasn't at the top shelf. He hated having to use ladders. The ones this particular library owned were old and definitely not stable to carry his weight for an extended period of time. He almost fell once. It was not a recommended or pleasant experience. Kita continued his search, when a pair of shoes caught his eye. Through a small space in the bookshelves, he could see the section right next to him. The shoes seemed to belong to a figure slumped against a wall, but Kita couldn't see the person's face. He could see open books and papers on the floor, and deduced that this could be the sleeping person the librarian had mentioned earlier. Kita guesses they fell asleep after revising what he could only assume are study notes. He stops peeking because he feels like a creepy stalker, and goes back to finding the workbook. Luckily, it wasn't on the top shelf. He internally let out a sigh of relief after seeing that the book was within reach before extending his hand toward it. Kita heads straight to the checkout counter so he could save more time. He spots his friends deeply engaged in conversation at the table he left them. He may not show it much, but he really is grateful for his friends. Without them, he'd probably be like one of those stereotypical nerds you'd find in fan fiction who'd eat all alone in dirty bathroom stalls. At least now, the 5 of them can be nerds together. Is it done? Can we go now? The twins asked in unison when Kita approached the table. Yeah. He chose to ignore the twins' faces that were practically screaming for him to hurry up. It was a newly opened cafe, after all, it was a fight for seating. Kita jokingly pushed both of their faces away with one hand and absent-mindedly grabbed the bag on the chair with the other hand. "We can go now." They were at the doors when Kita realized he forgot to say that he didn't have an umbrella. "Wait, how are we going to get to the cafe?" He didn't like the matching grins Osamu and Atsumu gave him when they slowly turned to him. Aaron thinks he broke his neck. With a crack, he groans as he stretches and yawns. That's what he gets for falling asleep against a wall, he thinks. He checks the time on his phone and sees that it's been 2 hours since he fell asleep. He was supposed to be studying for a big test tomorrow. It is literally the main reason why he came to the library today, and a 2-hour nap certainly wasn't a part of his schedule. Aaron stood up and grabbed all his stuff. He's so glad nobody usually comes to this part of the library. It's sort of a secluded section that nobody was really interested in, so there was no chance that anyone would have seen him be so soundly asleep on the floor, or so he thought. Except Sugawara. But Sugawara worked there, and though he was younger than him, he's basically one of the only 2 parental figures Aaron has in his life, so he doesn't mind if he sees him drooling in his sleep. Maybe he would even be kind enough to close his mouth so it wouldn't catch flies. He did tell him he was going to study there, so he hopes he kept the area devoid of other people. Aaron walks back to the table that had his stuff. Some chairs were left pulled out, indication that maybe someone was reading here a little while ago. Aaron's things didn't look to be meddled with, as everything was how he left it. Even if there were thieves, which was highly unlikely, Akashi would have to step in. Sure, he didn't seem like the type at first glance, but he surely wouldn't allow such people to step foot inside the library. If there were thieves, Aaron felt bad for them, for they had to face Akashi's unpredictable wrath. His gaze wanders over to the windows and sees that it was still heavily pouring. There were even some people playing in the rain outside, and Aaron watches them with a soft smile on his face. Dancing figures in the far distance, they were wearing uniforms, so they must be about Aaron's age but students from another school. They seemed to be having fun except for one hooded person who, by the looks of their body language, was probably dragged along by the rest of the group. It could be a scene from a coming-of-age movie, or a scene from one of his favorite books. Aaron was a little jealous of them. If he were to tell the truth, his only friends were the 2 librarians, a 6-year-old who visits the children's books section sometimes, and his best friend who attended a different school, and said friend was so stingy sometimes. Aaron diverted his attention back to his notes and school textbooks. He had no time to watch other people live their lives when he had his own to worry about. After studying, he'll most definitely go back to the book he was staying up late for last night. He couldn't wait to jump back in and read about the story of a boy called Finch and a girl named Violet. Something was very wrong. Aaron spent 1 more hour to study, and when he's sure he finally got everything down, he decides he's finished with it. He hopes the events of tomorrow would be in his favor. Except even the events of now aren't. When Aaron was about to pack his things and leave, the contents of his bag seemed to have changed. He should have known something was up when the bag was on another chair, but he shrugged it off, thinking that someone could have just moved it. There was a different pencil case, a cluster of different notebooks, and even a different book. From outside, the bag looked to be his, but inside, it certainly wasn't. Wait. There's no way. Aaron rummaged through the bag again. He finds a collection of sticky notes inside a binder, some candy wrappers in the smaller pockets, and an empty lunchbox with a bit of leftover food. There was also a semi-filled sketchbook containing very beautiful artwork. So beautiful that it almost made Aaron forget his primary objective, looking through stuff that wasn't his. Now that he's done so, he's sure of it. This bag wasn't his. It couldn't be. Unless his things managed to teleport somewhere on their own, this just wasn't his bag. Aaron's confusion soon turned into frustration when he realized that it meant his book was missing. His beloved book, he was going to finish it tonight, but the universe seemed to have other plans for him. Plans that obviously weren't in his favor. He went up to the counter. As expected, Akashi was behind it. The librarian was in the middle of sorting out books from a cart, when he noticed Aaron approaching. "Aaron-san? What can I help with?" Akashi was basically the head of the city library. In a way, it was his, despite it being government-owned and his young age. Everything that happens inside there was under his watch and protection. He's also taken a strange attachment to Aaron. Taking another high school student under his wing was not something he thought he'd do when he applied for the job, but he's learned to accept it. This. Aran held up the bag. Is not mine? Akashi only raised an eyebrow, his blue eyes scanning the bag, not following. He moved closer. Elaborate. Aran groaned. He opened the bag's zipper and showed him the contents inside. This bag is someone else's. We must have bags that look the same and they confused mine for theirs. Can you please check the camera and see if someone left with a bag that looked identical to this? Akashi started to get it now, but he sighed. Well, that will take a lot of work. Please Kashi? Aran was going to beg if he had to. I help out here every summer. Please, Kashi, it's just this one thing? The young librarian thought about it for a minute. Fine, I'll see what I can do. I'll give you updates on it tomorrow. Aran brightened up. He hugged him over the counter. Thank you. Akashi pretended to dislike it and lightly pushed him away. In the meantime, why don't you keep that bag? Until we can find its rightful owner, it should stay with you. Assuming yours is with them. I guess so. He wishes he could return it really soon and get his back. He wants to finish the book before he forgets the plot. Was that Pride and Prejudice? Akashi's eyes moved down to the bag. Aran followed his gaze. He pulled out the book, observing it. Of course they're a classic lit reader. Akashi stares at him for a few seconds before laughing at his reaction. What's that supposed to mean? You know, you should finally get started on classics. I've been trying to avoid them. It's not my fault I can barely understand them. Aran said all defensively. He's going to admit that they did interest him, but he tried reading The Portrait of Dorian Gray one time but did not make sense of any of it. Why does the book call the man Lord Henry and Harry interchangeably? It made things confusing. And what did Hithertho, by the by, and other old-fashioned English terms mean? Aran's only annotations were question marks and me's written beside the word gay every time it showed up. As you can tell, he was quite the comedian. Aran wished classics had modern and more simpler translations, like Shakespeare's works, but there weren't any for novels. Aran likes to stick to his young adult stories, he gets through them much faster. It's not that he hates classics, he just can't get through them. Pride and Prejudice would be nice for a beginner. Akashi advised. You may not believe me, but I think you'd like it. Just give it a read until you get back to your book. Akashi gives him one last smile before going back to his work, leaving Aran with a stranger's bag on his shoulders and a stranger's book in his hands. He eventually goes back to his table and plays around with the book. Its owner had so many annotations, despite the book being practically tiny. They were inked in such neat cursive handwriting, the kind that'd be perfect for handwritten love letters. Aran finds himself being interested in how this stranger's mind works after reading their thoughts on the pages, and he even chuckles to himself at their humor. Aran actually would have been fine if they just swapped bags. But they just had to swap books as well, and that means they've also currently swapped literary worlds. Being sick in bed was certainly not on Kita's schedule. Turns out, staying under the rain can make you sick. Who would have known? Kita did. But he got carried away because he was having too much fun with his friends, so he doesn't hate it as much as he thinks he would. He just hates his nose for being clogged and feeling so hot and gross and the blankets for being uncomfortable against his heated skin. Kita doesn't get sick often, but when he does, it truly is a terrible experience. He can't stand it. He can't do anything except wallow up in his own sweat, snot and misery. Kita couldn't even read anything because he would get dizzy, and he can't listen to music because it would get on his nerves if he couldn't find the exact song he was looking for. Kita has no other choice but to attempt to fall asleep, but unfortunately his clogged noise is preventing him from doing that. He hates it so much. At this point, death seems like a much kinder option. He knows he's going to be sick for a few more days. This was why he avoided being sick. He sighs and rubs his temples, trying to convince himself to fall asleep. That's when his phone rings. He looked pathetic moving his heavy body to the edge of the bed to grab it, sniffling at every second. It was a video call from the group chat. He taps to join in. Kita is greeted with the faces of his friends, who were also very visibly sick and in bed. Kita's not going to lie, he almost burst out in laughter when he saw them. So it turns out all of them got sick at the same time. Maybe that was a bad idea. Osamu said through the other line, referring to their playing in the rain. He coughed in the middle of his sentence. Suna laughed, his voice clearly hoarse. You think? The sweets were so worth it though. Akaji kindly pitched in. Kita thinks back to how he ordered several more separate slices of cake aside from the one they ordered. Atsumu seemed knocked out the most, with Osamu laughing at the poor boy. The group talks for about a little over an hour before they all collectively decide that they were tired and should go to sleep. Kita also pointed out that they were missing school days, which erupted very loud groans from on the other sides of his screen. However, Kita didn't actually get to sleep until one more hour later. Again, he absolutely despised being sick. Kita woke up to the sun setting. That's when he knew he had a very long nap. He doesn't feel like dying anymore, so that's progress. He sits up, carefully removing the towel on his head and checking his own temperature. He still feels like he's touching a furnace, so this fever isn't going anywhere anytime soon. The pounding headache was starting to disappear, so Kita figures he could sneak in a few more pages of his book until he eventually feels tired again. Kita grabs the bag at the bottom of the bed. He feels around for his book and fishes it out. Only to find out that it wasn't his book. The title read out all the bright places in bold letters. It's a book Kita's never even heard of, let alone would put it in his bag. His hand feels around for more things, and realizes he doesn't think he recognizes any of them. He dumps the bag's contents on his bed. A large pencil case, chapstick, a journal and a few sticky notes sat on his covers, Kita observing them. After a few moments of careful consideration, Kita comes to the conclusion that this wasn't his bag. And this wasn't his book. He must have been busy talking to his friends to realize he grabbed a different bag. It looked exactly like his. They even have the same frog keychain. This was getting ridiculous. Somewhere, the universe was pointing its fingers and laughing at him, mocking him for his idiocy. Kita collapses on his bed. He feels the exhaustion coming up to him again. The book seems to look old. Its pages were starting to yellow, as if the owner has had it for a long while. There were lilac tabs sticking out from the pages. There weren't a lot of them, but there was enough for Kita to think that the owner annotated this book. He opens more pages to find that he was right. He skips past the publication and title pages to see a quote by Ernest Hemingway. It reads, "The world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places." There were drawn on quotation marks and little doodles. Below the quote was a sticky note, the word playlist written and underlined on the top. There are several songs listed, and Kita could even recognize some of them. Kita found it undeniably cute. The owner's handwriting and the doodles. Kita would definitely have to return this book and this bag, but that one page had intrigued him. He flips the book and reads the description at the back. A heart-wrenching, unflinching story of love shared, life lived, and two teens who find each other while standing on the edge. Maybe he'll read this book to pass the time while he's sick. There it is. Aran squints at the footage Akashi is showing him. His finger is pointing to a short white-haired boy, a bag that looks identical to Aran's on his back. He was with his friends when they exited the library together. That must be it. He looked closer, but he couldn't see the boy's face. All Aran knew was that he had his bag, and Aran had his. He comes here quite often, so I think you'll see him soon enough. He pats him on the shoulder and he watches him fade into the rows of bookshelves. Aran continues to stare at the back of the white-haired boy who took his bag on the screen. Aran can't recognize him anywhere. He was wearing a different school's uniform too, and that made things a lot worse. He hopes they'll meet again. He really wants to pick up on his book, but he's actually starting to get interested in the stranger's book. At first, Aran was only going to read the owner's annotations, but he got carried away and got curious about the book's actual contents. He's obviously heard of Pride and Prejudice before. It's a really popular book and he thinks that every reader has read it at least once. Is he actually starting to consider reading it? Aran stares at the book once more. It's not like he had anything better to do. He goes back to his usual table, dropping the bag, that wasn't his, in front of him. Aran continues to only poke at the book for a short while, carefully contemplating his decision. He schemes through the whole book. It seemed like it would take him a few days to get through it. It only had 300 pages, so it's the same length as the books he usually reads. He then looks around the table he's sitting. Just a day ago, the owner of this book must have been sitting around here somewhere. And they left before he and Aran could cross paths. Aran began to wonder what they were like. They like classics, so they must be one of those really prestigious and intelligent literature kids. Aran knows a few from his school. They need to stop using words that nobody knew the meaning of, he thinks. Should he read the book? He checked the time on his phone. It's still a little early, and he had no more test to study for. Truly, he really didn't want to think about the test he studied for the other day. A few minutes passed, before Aaron ultimately ended up deciding that, fuck it, I'm going to read this book. He can't believe it was his boredom had drove him to read a classic such as this. And maybe his interest in the book's owner's annotations. And maybe his curiosity of the owner himself. Aaron turned to the first page. It is a truth universally acknowledged, that a single man in possession of a good fortune, must be in want of a wife. Ajiro. The door to his bedroom opens, and Sakusa comes on with his default annoyed expression. Maybe he isn't even annoyed, but unfortunately that was the face he was born with. I've been telling you for minutes now. Dinner's ready. Ah. Aaron was wearing earphones. And was lost in his book. Well, it wasn't his, but you get the point. Surprisingly, he admits that he actually quite likes it. He didn't expect to laugh at humor from centuries ago, but he did, and some of the dialogue were unintentionally humorous. Also, it consisted of his personal favorite trope, which was the classic enemies to lovers. He liked reading the scenes along with the book owner's annotations. It made Aaron's reading experience better. If Aaron would, he would write his own annotations on the book as well, but he knew it wasn't his, and he'd get pretty annoyed if a stranger would dare write in his book, so he decided against it. Aaron almost forgot that Sakusa was still at the entrance to his room, raising his eyebrow at him. Ah. Right. Aaron pulled out his earphones and put the book down. I'll come down. For some backstory, Aaron had been living amongst the Sakusas ever since his mother tragically passed away. It was tough, of course. But they were kind enough to take him in and treated Aaron as their own. Surprisingly enough, despite Sakusa's naturally blunt personality, he was still quite the pleasant roomie. Though, he fought the constant urge to call the boy Tsundeer, for he knew he'd never see the light of day ever again. Aaron knew he truly cared even when he refused to admit it. Sakusa had his eyes on the book. Since when did you read classics? Is me reading classics really such a shock to everyone? Aaron hopped off his bed. Yes. Sakusa said, sarcastically. His gaze was still on the book on Aaron's bed. What? Why are you staring at it? Did Sakusa somehow know that it wasn't even actually Aaron's book in the first place? Aaron wouldn't be surprised. Sakusa somehow knew everything, so it was pretty hard to keep secrets from him. It was so annoying when they were younger. Sakusa shook his head. It's nothing. I just swear I saw a kid at school reading that exact same book. It's a very popular book, kiddo. It was Aaron's turn to be sarcastic. I guess people just like it. Aaron didn't think much of it. He's also seen other people at his school and even in the library read it. It's safe to say a good chunk of people enjoyed it. Sakusa thought about it for a while before letting the thought go. Maybe I'm just imagining things. Both boys hear a shout from downstairs. It was Sakusa's father's voice telling them that dinner was starting to get cold. Aaron lightly smacked the back of Sakusa's head, before bolting ahead at the speed of light. Last one down the stairs is an ugly cow. What are you, 5? Sakusa complained, running after his best friend. Time skip. Aaron's back inside the library. Unfortunately, he got news from Akashi that the stranger that he unknowingly switched bags with had not been at the library for a few days now. The first thing Aaron thought was worry, that maybe something happened to that stranger. Akashi saw his expression. Relax, Aaron-san. I'm sure he'll come around in no time. How do you know that? Aaron groaned. What if he doesn't come back? And my book is gone forever? Oh, don't be so dramatic. Akashi laughed lightheartedly at his distress. He borrowed a few books the last time. Unless he would like to get a warning from the library, he'll have to come here eventually. Aaron sighed. He can't argue with that logic. It's unfair how Akashi was somehow always right about most things. Still, Aaron can't help but wonder. Is there any way you could find out who they are? He borrowed some books, right? So is his name in any of the records? Akashi thought about it. I could. The library keeps track of all the people who borrow books. But then, he has a mischievous smile on his lips. But wouldn't that be invasion of privacy, Aaron-san? Aaron groaned again. He held up the stranger's copy of Pride and Prejudice. Didn't you suggest I read this? Isn't that invasion of privacy? Oh, you're quite the clever one, aren't you? Well, fine. I suppose you've caught me. Akashi admitted, mockingly putting his hands up in surrender. But, I'll only check and inform you once you've finished the book. Aaron's face drops at this. Is this your way of getting me to read classics? Akashi smiled, acting all bright and innocent. I'm not passing up the opportunity, I've been trying to get you to read them for a whole year now. You know this, Aran-san. In the end, Aran rolls his eyes and gives in. Okay. He says sarcastically, because somehow Akashi still won. Of course he did. I'm nearly halfway anyway. It'll take me a few more days. You'll end up wanting to read more once it's over. Akashi teased. He patted a hand on his shoulder. I'll be off now. I still have a job and all. Enjoy your book in the meantime, Aran-san. Aran moved away from his touch and he laughs, going back to the checkout counter. Once he's out of Aran's sight, he slams his head onto the table, not minding the concerned looks from everyone around him. He lifted his head and turned it sideways, only to be met with the very book that started it all. To be completely honest, Aran was kind of enjoying it. The plot was interesting and the characters were really fun to read, but he refused to admit that out loud. Especially to Akashi. He sat up straight, picking up the book again. Aran turns to the page he left off, and realized that he was getting closer to the page where the owner left his bookmark on. He's a little sad that the annotations were going to end soon, but now he had a goal to complete by finishing the book, so Aran wastes no more time in getting back in between the pages. Good morning. You look like shit. Suna greeted Kita, who just sat down after entering the classroom. It's his first day back at school after being sick. No surprise that he, as Suna put it, looked like shit. MHM. Kita nodded at his seatmate. He's sitting up straight for a few seconds, before slamming his head on his desk. Suna doesn't even flinch. He's probably used to it. Or he's just that composed all of the time. What's happened to you? Kita turned his head to glance up at Suna. The latter was on his phone, probably texting someone. Kita replied, in a monotone voice. Book? Ah. I see. Suna nodded. He softly patted Kita's head. Carry on. Kita chuckled at that. He lifted himself up, yawning. He really didn't plan on sleeping late last night, he swears, he just couldn't put the book down. It was really hard to do so, when he was so immersed in the story happening inside it. Violet and Finch. Kita thinks he's dried up the amount of tears he had for the week. He didn't expect such an ending, but he should have, that could have saved him a few tears. The book was written so beautifully. Kita didn't usually enjoy reading first-person point of views, but Finch's chapters felt so personal that had Kita feeling like he was reading a diary that he wasn't supposed to. Kita's heart was practically torn out of his chest. He probably can't look at a sticky note the same way ever again after reading the book. The ending had him sobbing at 4 in the morning while listening to Somewhere Only We Know by Keen. That was the reason for Kita's puffy eyes and the dark circles under it. The book owner's annotations felt very personal as well. Kita tried to not read the ones that were obviously not something he should read, but it made him question the owner's mind and personality. Did they usually like reading sad books? Are they okay, mentally? Kita had all these sorts of thoughts running through his mind. The amount of me when written every time a romantic scene between the main characters came up were a quick break from the otherwise depressing themes of the book. Kita sort of wants to get his own copy now. Maybe he will this week. Oh. Suna's voice interrupts Kita's thoughts. We're dropping by the library later, right? Kita furrows his eyebrows, confused. Huh? We are? Suna then looks as equally as confused. Are we not? Didn't you borrow those books? I thought you said you were gonna return them today because it turned out that you didn't need to use them? That made Kita remember. He said it a few nights ago, when his mind was a mix of being on the verge of drifting to sleep and annoyance at the fact that their teacher cancelled the project he was going to use those books for. Right, I can go by myself. Were you gonna ask if you guys can go on ahead to the cafe? How'd you know? Atsumu's been blowing up the group chat with it. How could I not know? He then yawned. I'm going back to sleep. God, why did I choose to stay up on a school night? Suna laughed. Sure, Kita-san. This time, he patted Kita's shoulder. Get some more sleep. Kita was more than ready to do that. Not even a few minutes later, Kita was gone, soundlessly dozing off on his desk. Kita rolled his eyes at the excessing amount of crying face emojis in the group chat, before reassuring his friends that it was fine, he'd catch up to them after returning the books. Seems like the library was a little busy today. All the seats and tables were filled up, and people are being told to shush more than usual. Also, there's a long line at the checkout counter. Kita groaned when he saw it. It took him a few minutes to get to the front, and he was greeted with the warm smile of a black-haired boy with blue eyes. "Good afternoon," he told him, smiling with his eyes creased. "Good afternoon," Kita greeted back. He put the books he borrowed on the counter. He went on the computer to change the records, before squinting at something. His eyes went a little wide as he turned to look at him, and Kita wondered if he did something wrong. "Your name is Kita, right?" he asked all of a sudden, much to Kita's confusion. Yes?" The other then chuckled. "Don't act so scared. I just asked if that was your name." Kita then nodded, with a little more confidence this time. "Yes, it's my name." He kept his smile on him. He grabbed the books and placed them on a nearby cart. Before Kita could leave, he kept him at the counter for a little longer. "All right, I'm going to ask a question that might seem weird," he started, and Kita's mind raced through all the possibilities of what it could be. A true overthinker he was. "But, do you, by chance, have the wrong school bag?" He glanced over him, and the bag that Kita had accidentally swapped with a stranger's was slung over his shoulder. Kita's eyes have never went wider. "Yes," he said, getting a little too loud. He muttered a small apology afterwards. The boy reassured him that it was fine. "Now, I know the boy who owns the bag that you have right now, and I'm more than sure that he has yours." "Where is he?" He was finally going to get his book back. He was getting fidgety by the second. He gestured to the back of the library. "Over there. Near the science corner. Near where you borrowed your books, actually. You can find it easily. He has dark skin, plump lips, and if he's standing, he's fairly tall. His name is Aran, and if he asks, tell him Akashi sent you. Also, he might be reading your book because I told him to. I do hope you don't mind?" Kita shook his head. He did the exact same thing. It would be hypocrisy if he did mind. "Not at all. If that's all, may I go see him now?" The boy smiled at him again. "Go ahead. I know that you must want your hands on your stuff again." Kita returned his smile, and walked as fast as he could to find the boy that has his bag. He doesn't know if it's adrenaline, or the rush of excitement he got because he could finally have his things back, and most importantly, have his book back within his grasp. He didn't have any problems getting to the place the boy at the counter told him to go. Now all that's left was to find the boy. Dark skin, plump lips. Kita quietly walked past the other people near the bookshelves. Unfortunately, he couldn't find anyone that matched his description yet. He searches through several sections. There were other people reading, sitting on the floor or leaning against the bookshelves, but none of them seemed to be the person Kita was looking for. Kita debated whether he should go on a ladder so that he could see from above. A dark-skinned individual isn't hard to miss, as there weren't many around this part of Japan, so they would be really easy to spot from a bird's eye view. And even if there were, surely he would have recognized his bag being in their possession as well. Kita considered it, and started to search for a tall ladder he could climb. He soon found one, in a corner away from everybody else. He was about to grab it, when the gap in between the bookshelf near the ladder caught Kita's attention. Kita didn't know how he managed to spot it, but in the section right over, someone was reading a book that looked exactly like his copy of Pride and Prejudice. Kita left the ladder alone, slowly making his way towards the other side, not straying his gaze away from where he could see the book. Soon enough, Kita finds that his book was in the hands of a tall and undeniably attractive boy. He had dark skin and deep eyes that were just as dark. Embarrassingly enough, he also stole a glance towards the other's lips, and Kita would agree that yes, the black-haired boy's description of the other was accurate. Kita recognized the school he was from by looking at his uniform, and he had his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The boy seemed to be deep in thought, and Kita sees that he was nearly done with the book. Kita didn't know what to do to get his attention. So, he awkwardly coughed. The boy immediately lifted his gaze, pupils growing wide at the sight of another person. "Who?" the boy said, before glancing at the bag on Kita's shoulder. He then shut the book. "That's mine." Kita looked at the bag. There was another one near the boy's shoes, and Kita guessed that that one was his. Kita removed the bag on his shoulders and held it towards the boy. "I apologize for mixing up our bags." He looked at the book that was still in the boy's hands. "And our books?" The boy looked down at the book Kita was staring at and flushed, just realizing. Oh, yes, you're right." He grabbed the bag that was his, and returned the one that belonged to Kita. Kita began. "You're Aran, right? Akashi sent me." Aaron blinked for a few seconds before responding. Yeah. My name's Aaron. He paused for a moment, as if unsure if he should ask. What's your name? Oh. I'm Kita. Kita introduced himself. He didn't like how he had to look up at Aaron to talk to him. Curse people who were taller than the average height. That's a pretty name. Oh. He coughed slightly. Why thank you. They both could obviously feel the awkward tension between them. Aaron cleared his throat. Kita silently thanked him for breaking the awkward silence. I'm sorry, you must want this back. Aaron came closer to give Kita his book back. The boys brushed fingers ever so slightly, before retracting their hands and turning red at the same time. Aaron coughed again. So, it was my first time reading a classic. Really? By the amount of classic authors mentioned in all the bright places, Kita was a little shocked to know that the owner didn't read any. How was it then? It was surprisingly really good. Aaron admitted. I ended up getting attached to Jane and Bingley more though. Their relationship was really cute. Me too. Kita spoke up. The tension has melted away now. My friend kept calling me weird for focusing more on the side characters, but Jane and Bingley's relationship was just so intriguing, you know? They were really adorable in the film too. Bingley's actor was really cute, I'll give him that. Aaron's eyes visibly lit up at that. He slowly broke out into a huge smile. Oh my god. I have to watch the movie now. You must. It's really good. They added a couple of scenes and lines that weren't included in the book, but they didn't alter the plot that much. The proposal scene was still very iconic. Aaron didn't reply right away, which made Kita worry that maybe he weirded him out with how he talked too much, and was about to mutter an apology when Aaron beat him to a sentence. You know what? Wanna come to a bookstore with me? What? Kita felt his face getting hotter by the second. I kinda want my own copy of Pride and Prejudice now. Aaron admitted. Kita chuckled wholeheartedly. Actually, I was thinking of getting a copy of All the Bright Places. Kita's never seen such deep brown eyes when Aaron beamed. You read the book? Seriously? Yeah. Kita nodded. I'm going to reread it and cry again at the ending because I hate myself like that. At that, Aaron laughed soundly. God. That's what I was worried about. I hope the book didn't fuck you up that much. Oh. It's too late for that. It already did. Kita deadpanned, adding more to Aaron's laughter. Wait, you already finished it? Yup. The first time I read it was years ago. Didn't really understand anything, but now I'm rereading it and realizing that it probably wasn't something an 11-year-old was supposed to be reading. You were 11 when you got it? Now Kita's laughing. Oh god. You were in for such a ride. I was. Aaron laughed along with him. In my defense, I only got it because I thought the cover was pretty. Kita smiled at him, their laughter dying down slowly until they were back to the silence they were faced with the first time. I'll accompany you. Huh? The bookstore. I'll go with you. That is, unless you've changed your mind. Aaron was hurriedly denying that. Oh, no. I didn't. He smiled. You good to go right now? Kita thought about it. His friends were most definitely waiting for him, but he would be an actual idiot to pass up the opportunity to go to the bookstore with a very cute boy. They'll understand, but they'll probably also bug him for details later. Especially Atsumu. Kita nodded. Yeah. Let's go. Aaron and Kita continued their conversation on the way to the exit, and they may or may not have been shushed one too many times because of their loud laughing. They opened the door to sunny skies, that both boys were almost blinded by the sun the second they stepped out of the library. Huh? Aaron said when they were outside. The sounds of traffic and the busy streets could almost drown his voice out, so Kita was right next to him to be able to hear him properly. That's weird. I thought it was supposed to rain today. Aaron's eyes reminded Kita of cafes. It's like he was gazing into a fresh, warm cup of coffee. One that had been skillfully brewed to a color that you knew could relax one's soul the moment the beverage touched your lips. And with the sunlight gleaming from within his irises, it simply made them all the more beautiful. Even though it may as well be just Kita's unhealthy addiction to caffeine, he was mesmerized. It took a while for Kita to register Aaron's words. Oh? Really? I didn't even notice. Perhaps the universe didn't hate them after all. And